Hey guys, your PF debate teacher back with another video on April's topic resolved. The United States federal government should substantially increase its investment into domestic nuclear energy. So let's get started. First on definitions. So nuclear energy is defined as energy made by breaking the bonds that hold particles together inside an atom, a process called nuclear fission, and can make more energy with less fuel than any other technologies today, according to MIT. And according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, it's a low carbon source of energy that, unlike coal, oil, or gas power plants, nuclear power plants practically do not produce CO2 during their operation. So essentially, when you make nuclear energy, there's two forms of making nuclear energy. The first is nuclear fission, and the second one's nuclear fusion. However, most traditional nuclear power plants use nuclear fission because nuclear fusion hasn't been fully developed yet. But next, let's go look at the definition of nuclear fission. According to Stanford, it's the process of splitting a large atom into two smaller atoms and releasing heat. That heat is used to boil water, make steam, turn a turbine and generator, and produce electricity. And it's the only way to make nuclear energy. So nuclear fission is essentially the process where, according to the evidence, you break the atom into two, which causes energy and generates that energy necessary to run things like cars or any other form of technology that requires energy specifically. And as you see here, it doesn't require emissions, unlike other forms of energy, because you're only splitting an atom. You're not actually using a form of energy to create offsets, right? There's no offsets from nuclear energy. It's only by splitting the particle that is already existing. So next, let's look at the context. So what is the current US energy industry looking like right now? So according to the US Energy Information Association, the US energy production has been greater than US energy consumption in the recent years. Fossil fuels have accounted for 84% of US energy production. So what that means is that the US right now is showing interest toward nuclear energy, but we haven't seen that full shift yet because we're still completely reliant on fossil fuels, especially with Trump starting to deregulate the industry and allow more access for these people that the Biden administration previously prohibited from. And according to Kimball 25, the nuclear energy is racing to launch advanced small reactors by the early 2030s, promising to have smaller, lighter footprints that could make them cheaper and quicker to build when they are fully commercialized. So I did a little bit of research on this. I didn't do that much though, so you guys should probably take a look at this as well. But it seems that the hype for nuclear energy is all around SMRs, which are small advanced reactors. And essentially, they're just a form of nuclear energy that is more efficient and has been innovated to become more energy efficient and more productive, right? So do a little bit of research into that. But I think a lot of private companies right now are trying to invest into SMRs, which are apparently the next future of nuclear energy. However, according to Jacobson 24, there are no commercialized SMRs existing worldwide. In the United States, the only company building an SMR with its design approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission lost its main purchaser. Their test reactor, if it will be built at all, is not anticipated to be available until after 2030, far too late for it to be an effective solution to air pollution or global warming. So obviously, there's a lot of hype around the nuclear energy industry, right? But there hasn't been any materialized result, right? So which is why nuclear energy to a lot of people may seem like a distant dream, while to other people, they say that it's the next generation, right? So there's a very big disconnection between cost efficiency and also what will it look like for the future when nuclear energy, what specifically will nuclear energy have a role in the US industry? So think about that. Okay. Now, let's look at the global nuclear energy development. According to the IEA, of the 31 reactors that commenced construction since the beginning of 2017, 27 of these are either of Russian design or Chinese design. So, I can't remember the event, but the US in around the 2000s had a nuclear, like almost nuclear meltdown, and essentially the US stopped producing or constructing nuclear reactors for 20 years because of this this nuclear reactor almost coming to meltdown. I think it was like something island, but essentially what you need to know is that the US is kind of behind in global development because they're showing interest, right? But they're not really in the process of constructing like numerous factories, right? Compared to other countries like Russia and China. So the US right now is still very behind in nuclear energy development because in the past there have been a lot of things that have like delayed the efforts. Okay, let's go into framing. So this is essentially how I kind of pictured how debaters are going to be structuring their arguments on the AF versus the neg. So on the AF, it's long-term stability against the neg's short-term alternatives, right? Because for the AF, you're promoting this future where, yes, nuclear energy is extremely cost efficient and it's also energy efficient, which means that it will be a lot better than a lot of alternatives that we're facing right now, right? For the neg, I would say that you would frame it around like, because nuclear energy takes so much time to create, and also it's funding, like the money that people put into nuclear energy won't be put into renewables that are currently existing right now. It will actually harm climate efforts. So again, just in summary, what you should frame the debate or this topic around is AF is the long-term benefits, while the neg, it's like, well, what are the short-term implications and will it harm existing efforts to stop climate change? Okay, now let's talk about the AF arguments. The first AF argument that I found was really good was that nuclear energy would stabilize or boost the US economy. So the uniqueness is right now, natural gas pipelines, or essentially those are the way that people transport gases, right? Because you don't get all your natural gas, like you don't extract all your natural gas from the US, right? You get it from foreign countries. And through those foreign countries, the pipelines are the way that they send the gas to these private industries, right? So right now, natural gas pipelines are really inefficient, right? Because according to Disavino 25, pipeline capacity has not caught up with production, contributing to a 35% rise in electricity costs for the US consumers in the last 4 years. Moving gas requires significant pipeline investment, right? So essentially what this card is saying is that current natural gas is very unstable, right? It has a lot of delays, has a lot of issues that are really hard to solve without that like structural investment, which also, guess what, takes billions of dollars. Also, natural gas infrastructure weaknesses create long-term problems, as according to the IER, the world will face a 20% shortfall in natural gas supply by the end of the decade if significant increases in supply and infrastructure are not achieved. Right, so these two cards basically summarize that natural gas is inefficient, it's very short term, it's going to die off, right? So you're arguing essentially that like these short term alternatives that the neg is promoting for isn't all that good as they talk about. And even worse, Trump's tariff war. Rapier25 writes that energy markets also react strongly to uncertainty. If the tariffs introduce supply chain inefficiencies or raise the prospect of retaliatory actions from Mexico and Canada, crude oil futures could experience high volatility. So I'm guessing you have seen on the news that like Trump has declared trade wars on multiple countries like China, Canada, etc., right? And that's really bad, specifically Canada, right? Canada supplies a lot of the natural gas to the US. And when the US puts tariffs on them, there is a fear that they might send tariffs in retaliation, right? So again, all centered around the idea that the natural gas industry is extremely unstable, unfeasible, and it's not worth it in the long term. However, the link is that by affirming it drives private sector investment, as Kimball25 says, technology companies like Amazon, Meta, Microsoft will serve as a catalyst, and they're a huge force that can drive the nuclear industry forward due to their immense demand for electricity coupled with their deep pockets. So if you search up articles online, a lot of private companies are really interested in nuclearizing the grid because A, nuclear energy provides a lot of energy capacity compared to natural gases, and also B, there's a lot of hype around nuclear energy. They're seeing it as the next future. So there is a lot of interest for American companies to invest into nuclear energy. In turn, that reduces dependency on natural gas, as the World Nuclear Association finds that nuclear can directly displace fossil fuels from a country's electricity mix and establish strategic inventories. So, if we shift away from natural gas to nuclear energy, that means that we'll depend less on these unstable forms of energy and more on our domestic forms of energy via nuclear power plants. The impact is by allowing the energy market to become stable by providing a cheap domestic energy source and growing millions of new jobs. Nuclear energy prevents millions of households from going into poverty from high energy costs or recession. This doesn't have to be like your specific impact. This can be any impact about the economy, right? The main idea is just natural gas unstable. When we affirm, we move into a more stable energy, which prevents recessions because natural energy, like instability, causes recession in the past, right? That's basically the front line of the argument. You can change the impact any way you want, but that's just the central idea. Okay, moving on. The second half argument is that nuclear energy boosts the clean energy transition. The uniqueness is, right now, renewable markets is booming, as Light25 finds that renewables are now dominate new power generation capacity, while new domestic clean energy manufacturing are popping up around the nation. So right now, there's a clean energy movement. A lot of countries are interested in that clean energy. However, it's not enough to address climate change, as Reuters24 finds that U.S. investment in wind and solar power hit record levels last year, but even that dramatic rate of expansion fell short of the level needed to meet the nation's climate change goals. Essentially, uniqueness right now, there's not enough to solve for climate change with current alternative sources. The link is that nuclear energy is energy efficient, as the World Economic Forum in 2024 found that nuclear energy has the lowest carbon footprint and needs fewer materials and less land than other energy sources. Also, nuclear energy has a low carbon footprint. According to Soto24, nuclear power plants generate electricity through nuclear fission, which does not release carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases. As a result, nuclear energy contributes to lower CO2 emissions as it serves as a cleaner alternative to fossil fuel-based energy sources. So, because nuclear energy involves nuclear fission, which I mentioned in the definitions where you split atom in two, it doesn't create any offsets or any carbon dioxide compared to other alternatives, right? Which means that nuclear energy is a better solution for the future, and it's a better solution for averting climate change. The impact is, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, clean energy is crucial for sustainable development, eradicating poverty, and advancing health and education, as well as reducing emissions. Nuclear power can achieve a clean environment and a sustainable economy. So, again, similar to the first argument, this impact can be very flexible. You can change it, as I wrote it here, you can either change it to averting climate change or having a better economy, right? Those are essentially, you can use either one, but I guess the main idea for this argument is that renewables are good, right? They're doing good right now, right? But they're not enough to address climate change. However, nuclear energy is better because it's both energy efficient and it also has a lower carbon footprint, which means that we solve for everything and we have a really good transition, right? That's essentially the gist of it. Okay. Let's look at argument number 3, which is that the nuclear energy sustains the US's AI industry. So this argument is kind of interesting, and I would recommend it for debaters to run this argument and actually research about this because it is pretty interesting. So yeah, well, let me just run through it first. So the uniqueness is that the US government funding is lagging behind in the AI sector. According to Ferguson 25, in the US, government AI is falling behind both China and the private sector. Owing to inadequate funding, government agencies cannot compete with Chinese counterparts. So, as you've seen with current events, China's DeepSeek has been a massive push for them because I think ChatGPT for us took billions, maybe hundreds of billions to create, while DeepSeek only took tens of millions from one Chinese company to develop, right? So obviously, China's AI sector is growing massively compared to the US's AI sector. Also, AI systems demand energy that is efficient and sustainable. According to Cohen24, any solution to the usage problem posed by data centers must address the strain that will be put on the grid to which they are connected. The American electrical grid is already strained due to increased industrial production. So, as we as a population, as we as a society grow, we require more energy, which puts a bigger strain on our grid, right? Because guess what? There's not enough energy to sustain all of us, which means that as our population grows, as there's more mouths to feed, as there's more people who require energy, the current electrical grid is going to be strained, which means that we should be looking for a solution to address this problem, address the future problem of there's going to be not enough energy. The link is that nuclear energy fills needs of the growing industry, as Sachs25 finds that renewables don't produce power consistently enough to be the only energy source for data centers. Nuclear is the preferred option for baseload power, as it could start to bring down the overall carbon footprint of AI data centers. So, by nuclearizing the grid, a lot of these private companies will be able to have more energy efficient data centers and also to start to compete with China, because nuclear energy is both cost efficient and energy efficient compared to other renewables. And according to Brian25, to win the AI race, nuclear power will be part of the solution in generating more energy than other sources. Again, I think I mentioned this in argument number 1, but a lot of private companies are currently interested in investing into AI because they want to nuclearize their grid, right? They want to have a more efficient technology. As their data centers expand, as their company grows bigger, they require more energy, which is nuclear energy nuclear energy will be able to solve for this. The impact is the implementation of AI in the US's domestic sector, such as healthcare and finance, can help to boost the economy with more efficiency that can outcompete international industries. And according to Scientific American, AI's energy needs are poised to make climate change even worse. The technology is already responsible for massive greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. So, yeah, as the AI industry grows, it has a larger carbon footprint, right? Because it requires more energy to develop, and also it requires more water, right? It needs more water to sustain, to cool down these systems. However, when you use nuclear energy to make it more energy efficient, that means that not only will the AI industry will be more efficient in boosting our economic sectors, but also it will have a lower carbon footprint even when it's growing right now. So, again, all these impacts are really flexible, but it's just economic and environmental. Yeah. Okay. Now, let's look at the neg arguments. So what exactly can you run on the neg for this topic? Well, the first argument that I would suggest that you run is that nuclear energy investment decks the renewable industry. The uniqueness is right now, renewable sectors is important for climate change efforts, as the United Nations finds that cheap energy from renewable sources could provide 65% of the world's total electricity supply by 2030. It could decarbonize 90% of the power sector by 2050, massively cutting carbon emissions and helping to mitigate climate change. So yeah, renewable industry is doing really well right now. It's helping to replace a lot of the carbon, a lot of the fossil fuel emissions that we are currently relying on right now. Indeed, its development has been rapidly increasing, as ARENA finds that solar and wind energy continue to expand the most, jointly accounting for 96.6% of all net renewable additions in 2024. However, when you vote the affirmative, or which is to put nuclear energy in, nuclear energy replaces renewable funding, as according to Shaw25, the operational and capital cost of nuclear energy is worrisome, as in any investment in reactor infrastructure is a decision not to invest in alternatives like renewables. Essentially, when private companies and the government divert their funds away from renewables, it decks the industry, because then renewables they're not going to be able to continually grow, and also they're not able to innovate. Also, nuclear reactors are terrible, as according to Lubbins 22, cycling limitations and high capital costs require maximum runtime, but nearly zero operating cost renewables idle reactors. Nuclear new build, already grossly uncompetitive, are also slower, so it cut global 2010 to 20 carbon emissions fivefold less than renewables did. So obviously, nuclear reactors have a very large capital cost, and also they take really long to build. So you pay like probably billions of dollars for every new reactor that you create, and also you have to wait like 10 to 20 years for a reactor to actually be built, right? So if we're starting to invest more into these nuclear reactors and we're starting to divert funding away from renewables, we're essentially just waiting for the clock to tick down, but by then it may already be too late. So the impact is by diverting funding from the renewables industry to the nuclear energy industry, which takes years for the plants to manifest the benefits, potential investment into clean energy is wasted. And with climate change approaching, nuclear energy does not fit the time frame for climate efforts, right? So because we have to wait like 10, 20 years for these nuclear plants to actually be built, that means that we're just wasting efforts for climate change, and we're also never going to see the benefits of nuclear energy in the first place, because by then climate change may already be irreversible and we may not have a solution by then. Okay, let's look at neg argument number 2. The second neg argument that I would suggest running is that nuclear energy investment damages the environment. The uniqueness is right now, current clean energy transition is soon, and countries want to transition, as the WEF24 finds that 85% of countries support a swift transition away from fossil fuels, including a majority of the world's 10 biggest oil, gas, and producing countries. There's a transition right now, and a lot of people want to go into the clean energy market. The link is by voting for the affirmative. Nuclear energy plants take years to build, which delays climate efforts. According to Jacobson 24, one nuclear power plant takes on average about 14 and a half years to build. From the planning phase all the way to operation, about 7.1 million people die from air pollution each year, with more than 90% of those deaths from energy-related combustions. So switching out our energy system to nuclear would result in about 93 million people dying as we wait for all the new nuclear plants to be built in the all-nuclear scenario. So yeah, that number is mind-blowing. But essentially what it is that a lot of people are already dying from the effects of climate change, specifically energy-related like fumes in the air. And essentially, once we start building these nuclear energy plants and we stop investing into renewables, we're essentially just letting these people die, right? So that is just a really big number. And just like the short-term effects of building nuclear power plants is honestly really big. So yeah. And also, nuclear waste creates climate change. And nuclear waste also is when nuclear power plants essentially, they don't create CO2, but they actually create like physical offsets, and that is nuclear waste. And according to the NIRS, radioactive waste poses a global environmental crisis in tandem with climate change. The sheer amount of nuclear waste is enough to threaten clean drinking water and healthy food for the whole world. So I'm pretty sure right now there's already I'm pretty sure like the nuclear energy industry already like has a place where they dump nuclear waste. So I'm not really sure about the feasibility of this argument, but you could make the argument that like sometimes maybe most of the times nuclear energies and nuclear power plants neglect dumping wastes in actual like dumping sites, and they just dump it in the environment, which causes environmental harms, hurts the environment, hurts animals, etc. And also, mining uranium that is needed for nuclear energy causes climate changes. According to Haywood 23, almost 100% of the total ecotoxicity and human toxicity impacts over the whole nuclear life system is connected to mining. The systematic neglect of health and safety procedures in countries producing uranium. So, while the actual process of creating or like producing nuclear energy is eco-friendly and cost beneficial, the way that you extract the materials and also the resultants or like the additional factors in nuclear energy are really bad for the environment, right? So you could make the argument that although nuclear energy, the process itself is beneficial, the way that you create that process or the way that the process is originated from is, like, for example, the materials that are needed to create the energy is really bad and is probably worse than the actual benefits that it produces. So the impact is not only does nuclear energy construction delay the transition to cleaner energy, but it also produces nuclear waste and increases mining of uranium, both of which exacerbate climate change. So yeah, while nuclear energy is theoretically good, it's net bad because of the process, the entire lifespan, and the process which is used to create the energy. Yeah, okay. So those were all the arguments that I wanted to present today. And just remember that essentially the framing is on the AF, the potential benefits and the sustainability versus the neg, which is the short-term alternatives and also the short-term implications, right? So make sure to kind of frame the topic that way, because that's essentially what most people are going to be discussing or debating on this topic. Yeah. So again, thank you so much for watching this video. This is your PF debate teacher, and I'll be back with another video maybe in a week or so, but I'll let you know. Yeah. Thank you.